clear these. So you have what we need to know about the students, and this is what I meant. The students, their information, their likes, their dislikes, their characteristics, their developmental assessment. Where are they developmentally? Where are they intellectually, socially, physically? Not all your kids are going to be on the same level. Depending on what we have, that's what we plan for. That's what we plan to assess for. What are their interests? Learning their interests is so important. Get my annotator. Interest, student interest equals access to the internal motivation. So it's not just about, oh, we want to know who they are, blah, blah, blah. Knowing who they are allows us to help teach them better. Their interests are not just, so that we can know it and we can be chummy with them. No, knowing their interests is for a particular reason. It is to gain access to their internal motivation. So if I'm a math teacher and I have third graders and a group of them, are struggling, and a few of them in the group really like cats, then I am going to change some of my word problems to include cat-themed things. Just that correlation to their interests gives them a buy-in to the engagement, a buy-in to the activity, where, okay, let me play around in this thing that I already play around with. I might be doing math, but I'm counting puppies or I'm counting kittens. And so that interest is so important. Cultural and socioeconomic differences got to be taken into consideration when you're planning for instruction. So domain 1, standard 1, about students, about the content, you're planning, utilizing the TEXES. You're planning that is specifically trying to promote students' learning, specifically connecting prior knowledge with what you're already doing. Planning for misconceptions. If you know that there's a particular area that's difficult for students, and it's different in each content area. There are particular misconceptions in reading, in math, in science, and social studies, common misconceptions. And so we plan in order to help minimize error, to help minimize difficulty or lack of comprehension. For instance, in a class where I am teaching something in ELAR, English Language Arts and Reading, if I'm doing a text and the text has 4 vocabulary words that the publishers have identified, but I know my particular students, and some of them are ELLs. So they might not have access to more than just 4 words. They might need 8 words that are defined and gone through via instruction, via visuals, via connection to prior instruction. And so I make that change, even if it's in my curriculum that there's only 4 vocabulary words. If I know my students and I know, oh, they're not going to get hullabaloo or a ruckus, these words that are like uncommon to non-native English speakers, then it behooves us to plan and demonstrate an awareness that our students don't have that information yet, and we need to fill that hole or fill that gap in order for instruction to be effective, in order for comprehension to take place based on the students that we have. So domain 1, It's all about students first and foremost, what we know about our students and how that affects our planning. What we know about the curriculum, what we know about the state TEKS, what we know about what is a common misconception for main things, and how to plan to make connections across disciplines. Anytime we can plan instruction that makes connections across disciplines, to theater, to fine arts. If I'm an English language arts teacher and I'm connecting to science, I get a gold star as a teacher. My job is to show the students that what they're learning is not something that's like in isolation. English language arts and reading is not in isolation. It is in everything. It is in ads. It is in how we talk. It is in how we write. It's in email. It's in all of it. And so not just showing them the skills, but showing how each of those skills traverses lines and crosses over to different disciplines and is needed. That's so important for our students in math and science, so that they understand that science and math are so tightly intertwined. Most of the elevated science is just math. Yes.
We need to make the formula because we haven't made them yet.
Okay, one moment.
Thank you, Mom.
I pour this into this, right? And then I put it in hot water. All the way to the top, like it's gonna fit. Not to the bottom, do it all the way to the top. Wait, I'm sorry. You did the number 10. It's gonna be 3, 2, 2. Okay. So next we have your selection of instructional goals and objectives. Now, from our TEKS, we create instructional goals and objectives. It is the guiding, think of it as the thesis statement for your lesson plan, right? It is the guiding principle for your lesson, the instructional goal and objective. Our goals need to be clear, our objectives need to be clear, relevant, meaningful, and age appropriate. Meaningful means it relates to them. Remember I talked about interests? Remember I talked to you about connecting to real world examples? That's what meaningful. How is it relevant? How is it meaningful? And it needs to be age appropriate. You wouldn't assign, an instructional objective of students to analyze a poem for diction in kindergarten. They don't know what diction is. And they don't know that like words have connotations and can mean different things. They're not there yet. It would not be age appropriate for you to have that instructional goal for them. This is very important. Every instructional goal and objective must be able to be assessed. We have to be able to measure it. And so there is a question on the practice exam where I believe the question asks you like, what is the primary concern that a teacher should have based on their objective? And it refers you back into the scenario to an objective. And in the objective, the students are tasked with giving an opinion about a political stance and showing knowledge. And it's very difficult to measure if somebody's opinion, right? Opinions are opinions, period. You can't grade it wrong or right. It's an opinion. And then to measure someone's understanding of a topic or appreciation of a topic, again, unclear. difficult to be assessed. It's not like, did they get 2 + 2 right? That's very easy for us to assess. So we want for every instructional goal and objective to be able to be assessed. That's not to say that you couldn't ask the student to give their opinion on something and show an awareness. You would have to have a rubric in order to assess them. Very specific requirements that would categorize what would give them a passing score. So we just need to make sure that every goal and objective that we create for our students in class can be measured, because we don't do anything for nothing. And we measure things not to just to give them grades. We measure things so that we can see where they are in progress. And the TEKS are what the students need to learn in your classroom before they leave. They're required by law to learn that. You were required by law to help them learn that, those knowledge and skills. And so when we create our lessons, we develop these goals and objectives, all the while assessing them to see, do they have this mastery? Are they able to go to the next level? Next, we have resources. What resources are you using? Are you integrating technology to promote learning, to expand instructional options? That means you're not just having them type out something that they could have written in your class. That's not expanding options. You having them, create a blog that someone else from another country is going to write on, or creating a, book review of some sort, actual use in technology that connects them to other people, that connects them to learning, that helps build on the ideas and the knowledge and skills that we are utilizing here. And so anytime technology is utilized in the classroom, it should always be as a way to promote or extend the learning, to expand it, to make it grow larger. Next, obviously designing coherent instruction. That's like a large part of it, but you have to use all of this knowledge, your knowledge of students, your knowledge of content, and pedagogy. Pedagogy is the art of teaching. It is the art, the science, and the craft. Teaching is a science. We must create a lesson plan for 30 to 35 completely different individuals at completely different learning levels, with completely different linguistic abilities, with completely different affective, meaning self-confidence, all of it different. And we have to have the same outcome for each of them and plan for that. It is a science experiment every day. Teachers are scientists, but it is also a craft, because you have to know it's not like regimented science. It's a craft. It's like cooking, where you ease off the heat and turn it up and add a little bit more spice. And that's the pedagogy portion of it. Instructional objectives, resources, using all of that to design that coherent instruction, where you're planning activities, getting instructional resources that are going to enhance their achievement, and they're going to engage. Engagement is huge. I used to work in 2003, 2004 with a lot of teachers. I was a young teacher when I first started teaching. I was 21 years old, and many teachers were very much older than me, and they all would say, I'm not going to go in there. Not all of them, but many of them would say, I'm not going to go do a song and dance to get their attention. But not that you have to do a song and dance, but yes, you have to pay attention, and you have to plan for things that are interesting. You cannot do things that were done 10, 15 years ago and expect it to resonate with the same new group of people that you have. It's a different group of people, and you can't expect the same planning to achieve success for those people, because they're going to have different needs based on what we know. Their cognitive, their social, their emotional, their physical development is going to be different. Their linguistic ability is going to be different. And that's not even making a distinction between our English language learners and our native English speakers. You are going to have a plethora of difference even between your native English speakers. You're going to have some students that come in and they speak like, wow, like they're speaking to a little PhD student and they're in the third grade. And you'll have others that don't have access to vocabulary, which you would think is common. And in the same classroom, you're going to be reading the same text. And so you have to know your students. What do they know? What do they not know? What is interesting to them so I can utilize that, especially in small group instruction or in one-on-one when you're doing remedial stuff for them. The last leg of standard one, and standard one, I'm just going to write this here. Standard one equals domain one, right? 100%. It's 100% of domain one, but it is also 1/3 of domain two. Sorry, domain three. And this one is worth 34%. And this one is worth 33%. So in total, standard one comes out the most, and it should, because it's all about our students, the curriculum and resources and assessment, all of that there. Assessment is really important because we cannot plan for our students if we don't know where they are, which is why anytime anyone's been unsuccessful with a PPR exam and they're like, what should I study? The first thing I ask is for their scores. I cannot show you what best to look at if I don't know what you need. And so the reason why we give a variety every day, I'm talking about collecting data all the time. And assessment isn't just an exam. Assessment is data collection. You are just collecting data on student performance, walking around and listening to conversations, giving students multiple ways to show you that they know what you're assessing for. So for instance, if I'm going to ask my students, like, let's say the theme or the main idea or a book report, I can have them write it. I can have them do a book poster. I can have them orally talk to me about it, come up with some sort of like speech with it. And this, because I'm not grading them on writing, it doesn't have to be a written thing. If I'm just trying to see if they understand one particular objective, I can allow them various ways to show me that they understood, right? Various ways with which to show me their understanding. For instance, I'll give you an example of special ed student in a third grade class who suffers from dysgraphia, which is a disability with writing things and makes handwriting almost illegible. Very much difficulty writing words, numbers, and many students suffer for it in special ed. And so if I have a group of third grade students and a student suffers from dysgraphia, and I make all of my students in my math class write each step down that they do, but my special ed student can do the math, he can't do all the steps because it's too much writing, and it just like that will be too much of a task for his brain, and everything else will get befuddled. But I can allow him to skip it and he still gets the same answer. This is a true story. I had an intern say, I can't accept it. And I said, you must have, what do you mean? First of all, he's special ed, first of all. And secondly, he is able to do it. Now, yes, he did not give you the steps as labeled, but with dysgraphia, We know that that is a disability and that should be an accommodation. And actually it was. She was just a new teacher and she didn't realize that she had to make those type of written allowances for that student. No, you don't have to do each level of writing. You can do some of it in your head. You can do some of it in your calculator because of your disability. Never say, oh, I don't want to allow them to do this because it's going to be too easy or too, like, oh, they shouldn't be able to give me a book report orally. They should just have to write it. Well, if the objective or the goal isn't for them to write a book report perfectly, then who cares if they can't write it at that moment? The point is you are assessing their ability to give a book report or a reflection of their book reading. And so if they give you that reflection in a report, if they give it to you orally, if they give it to you in a visual representation like a book poster, then that's fine. They are still achieving the goal that you are assessing. So making sure that you are giving them multiple opportunities and multiple ways to shine for you. Promoting the students' use of self-monitoring. This is really important. And we do this all throughout, not just with assessment, but certainly with assessment, we want them to think about themselves, to self-assess after a group project, to self-monitor during let's say you're giving a project and you say, okay, at this week, you have to have this done, at this week, you have to have this done at this week, and then you turn it in. Well, you do little markers, little self-checks, self-monitoring. This forces them to think about their thinking, to reflect on their progress. That is a learned skill, metacognition, where you think about your thinking, or you think about your work, what you've thought, what you've done. And it's something that we need all the time. People do it, adults that have been trained well by their teachers do it just automatically. It's just sort of like second nature. You read something and then you think a paragraph. Did I understand that? Wait a minute, I didn't. Let me read it again. I didn't really get that. Let me read. That's you doing metacognition. But you have to be trained to do that. You were trained to do that. And we train our students. At the end of each paragraph, I always like my students to do a metacognition exercise with each one of these. They write it in their own words. Say it yourself in your own words and type out what it means. Whether it's 3 words or a whole new sentence, your brain made it your own. You wrote it down, which was a tactile kinesthetic activity. And that does something neurologically, just like it does for our students, which is why I like for you guys to do a deep dive, especially of standard one, so that you have the ins and out of students and how we are supposed to plan for them and assess them down pat, because it does make up such a large portion of our exam, almost 70%, not 100% of it, like not 100% of that 70%. I would say a good guess is like 50% to 40 to 50% of the exam comes from domain 1. Planning and assessment, planning effective instruction and assessment for all students, no matter where they are, physically, cognitively, emotionally, socially, affectively, whatever special label they have, whether they're ELL, whether they're RTI, 504, GT, special ed, taking that into consideration and making sure when you take the exam that you read mindfully, that you read those questions mindfully and find out what students have they, or what details about the students have they told me? What details about what they're supposed to be doing? Because you'll get questions about math teachers, you'll get questions about science teachers, but it's never about the science. It's never about the math. It's never about the English. It is about the pedagogy. It is about what scientific strategy, what research-based strategy or skills should you be doing with the students, pedagogical practices that we know based on research is best for the student that they have identified. Now, the next largest portion comes from standard 3. And standard 1, which is domain 1 and a portion of domain 3, and standard 3 comes out in domain 3. Standard 3 is about your implementation of your lesson, right? How did you do it? Did you provide responsive instruction? Did you utilize effective communication techniques? What type of communication? Did you have poignant questions? Orally and written, because you want to practice both oral and written. And I always like to ask my students a whole group, a whole class instruction question. Everybody gets the same group of questions, couple of questions. They have to write down the response, take a couple of minutes, think about it, write it down. Then I say, turn to your partner and think, pair, share. And I've carefully crafted where their partners and who their partners are to be beneficial to them. They're partnered with someone who is instructionally appropriate for them. If I have a GT student who's going to get bored, I'm going to pair them with someone who struggles, because they will be the mentor and that will be the added leg to their activity together. It helps both. Whenever you help someone else understand it, you understand it even more, and it solidifies that knowledge for GT students and obviously helps the struggling learners. So I'll tell them, I'll have these questions thought of because they are what I'm going to use to assess these questions where I'm checking for understanding. Did they get it? But I definitely want to give them opportunity to show what they know. So I give them, pose the question in a whole class setting, then have them think, pair, share, where they're able to negotiate meaning and correctness with an understanding with their partner. Once they've done that, they feel much more confident when I call on them, or even to volunteer when I bring it back to whole group discussion and say, okay, now let's hear for some people. What did we think the tone for Edgar Allan Poe's Telltale Heart is? And what diction words did you find to support that? And so they'll say, well, I thought the tone was this, and these are the diction words I, because it's blah, blah, blah. Excellent. So your ELL students will benefit from this because it allows them to practice in the language, to negotiate the meaning and the correctness and their understanding. Same with your special ed. Same with your GT, because they're going to be in, if you've carefully, positioned them in a place where they're going to get a lot of benefit via the interaction with their partner. So communication techniques, questioning thought up beforehand, that says using carefully framed, and these carefully framed questions can only come from, again, going back to standard 1, you have your objectives outline, your objective for the lesson. How am I seeking to assess them? And what questions might I ask to help ascertain or illustrate their understanding? So carefully framed questions, students reflect on their understanding of the content and also to consider new possibilities. Apply skills for leading discussions that engage all students. So again, that strategy of starting off with a whole group instruction and then moving to think, pair, shared, that is exploring and engaging. Kids are talking in small pairs, in large groups, and able to extend their knowledge, because it's not just what they know. When they think, pair, share, they also get what their partner knows. Then we move back to whole group, and then again can share. Engaging the students, relevant and meaningful ways. Do not teach your content area in a vacuum. Math shouldn't be just math here. You should always try to teach. Like today, I was bottle feeding the puppies and I was doing the math with the ounces, and I was saying, okay, I gave this one, that one, this one, and that means, and so I told my first and second grader, you see, math is all, we always need math. I just did math right now, figuring out the things. They need to see a connection between what they're learning in the classroom and how it's going to resonate in the real world. Nobody likes to learn things that they feel are like not applicable to them. If I feel like this is meaningless to me, automatically my brain as a conservation mode, like I don't need to know this. And so making something tangible in a metaphoric way means showing that it's meaningful and useful to them. Okay, strategies and techniques for using instructional groupings. Again, the groupings. You have to be so particular about who you're grouping together, because the students are a resource to each other. You cannot do it by yourself. You're not going to be sitting in the small group instruction in the groups doing the activities with them. So carefully plan out the groupings so that you know that the promotion of student learning is there. And that means that you're going to be flexible. If you see a group doesn't work, or you have a struggling learner here, and then you move it along in order to produce interactions that enhance the learning. We want students talking to each other, students that are able to support each other and learn from each other. So they don't just learn from us, they learn from each other as well. Different types of motivation. I talked to you guys about how the most difficult type of motivation to sort of extract from the student is that internal. But we know science, theory, like so many years, decades of research has told us when someone is interested in something, that's it. You got their buy-in already. If you let me choose who I'm going to do my research project on within, reason, then that's half the buy-in, because I already like that person. I chose them. I'm interested in knowing that person. I chose their name out of the whole universe. That's a big buy-in. It's a bigger buy-in than if somebody handed me, I don't know, Thomas Edison or Harry Winkler. I don't have any interest in them, and I don't really feel any sort of excitement. But if it's someone I already like and I chose it, then I'm going to have that buy-in to finish, to complete, to learn, to do. And that's the case for everything. Just if you just a little bit mess with it, you're going to be more open, more connected in your brain to that learning activity, to that learning event. And so utilizing that, it's so powerful. Learn who your students are and then utilize who they are to help you strengthen their learning. Pacing, making sure that your lessons are structured, right? You come in, you open up, you have like a bell ringer, you do vocabulary that you're going to need that's necessary for comprehension in the beginning. You give your direct instruction, possibly move to guided practice, and then group work where you move around and then check for understanding afterwards. You want to have structured pacing that moves along and promotes their learning and engagement, that they're able to be, that it's a predictive structure, and that it's also one that allows for them to be actively engaged. So like if you just go, you do your bell ringer and then you stand in the front of the class and you just solely do direct instruction where it's you teaching someone and just saying things, sort of like I'm doing now, after 30 minutes, people get tired, especially children, because their brains are not what adults are at. We're not working with fixed brains. We're working with growing brains, and that's different. So sort of pacing and making things structured and interesting by utilizing, what we know about the students. What do they like? If you have to speak to things that are foreign to you, do that. It is literally your job. If I have an ELL student from Nigeria, it is my job to become a Nigerian expert. I need to know about Nigerian writers. I only say this because I had a Nigerian student. And one of my favorite new writers is a Nigerian author, because I literally did my homework. I wanted to be able to tie into things, because I could do it all day long with a student that speaks ELL from Spanish, a Spanish speaking country, Nigeria, China, which are Arabic. There's a lot of other ELL students, and we have to find ways to bring in their culture. And if you don't know their culture, that means you have to learn it. That means every year you might have to do a new research project based on where your students are from. So you can bring up relevant activities, examples, connections to further not only their engagement, but their learning. So think of prior knowledge as a lasso. It is the lasso with which the student is able to throw around that new knowledge and grab it in and pull it. But we have to be able to make that connection for them. It is easier to make new knowledge and skills their own if we can connect it in relevant and meaningful ways, culturally, specifically to the student. That's not always easy, but we try every day. Providing feedback. Feedback is not just talk. Timely, high quality feedback. Timely means you're doing it fast. If you wrote an essay, I'm not going to tell you what you did wrong about it 6 weeks later. We're going to talk about it in a week. We're going to have a little peer review, or I'm going to, chat with each person for 2 minutes, 3 minutes on your work and give you high quality, not like, oh, you did a great job on your thesis. Your thesis was very specific and articulate. I love the way I could follow the organization. I already knew what to expect from my reading. Excellent job. That is high quality feedback where I pointed out the specifics of what they did correct. Same thing if you're going to give them a critique. You can't just say, oh man, terrible shot. What was that? Well, what kind of feedback or instruction can you get from that was a terrible shot? What about you didn't follow through all the way, swing through all the way with your forehand? That is high quality feedback because you are giving them instruction to make whatever it is they're doing better. Or if you're giving them feedback and they're on the right track, you are specifically pointing out this is what is very good, not just great job, good work, this needs work, or check number 7 again. Be specific. Look at number 7 again. Remember, you have multiple steps, and so there might be silly mistakes in the multiple mistakes. I would check each step to make sure your math is right. Quality, timely feedback, not just great job. Demonstrating flexibility and responsiveness is really important because you have to realize that we're dealing with humans. And I think that a lot of times teachers forget that. They get a group of 7th graders like, oh my God, these people, and you think that they're adults. They're not. They're little 7th graders, and their brains are not even fully developed yet. And they're not always going to be like engaged 100%. And you can't throw in the towel or get upset. You have to go to the drawing table and think like, what can I adjust? What can I modify to, make our learning or our instruction more meaningful? Likewise, it says respond flexibly to various situations such as lack of student engagement in learning activity or the occurrence of an unanticipated learning opportunity. If I'm talking with my students, and let's say I'm a science teacher and I'm out in the creek, we're collecting samples, and my student says, oh my goodness, it's a butterfly. I think that's a monarch. They're in season right now. Isn't that right, Miss Sauceda? And I say, we're here learning about the creeks and amphibians. We're not talking about butterflies right now. That's wrong. If a student brings up an unanticipated learning opportunity, then you follow it through. And then go back to what you were doing. You do not shut off a student's interest ever in a learning opportunity. So if they say, Miss, I thought amphibians only lived in the ocean, you'd be like, what? Let's talk about this for a second. Never shy away from unanticipated learning opportunities. Even if you feel like we're going off track, give it the attention that the student gave bringing it up to you, because it is their learning experience, not yours. Like, it is their learning experience. They're humans, not little robots. And so they're not on the same wavelength, and every opportunity for learning should be taken to fruition all the way through. Okay, we're going to end there today and meet again next week. Do I have any questions before we leave?
No, like always, super good information. Thank you, Ms. Sauceda.
Thank you, Sylvia. I apologize. Thank you so much for your patience. This week has been a nightmare and you guys have been so fantastic. I appreciate it. I appreciate you so much. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you, and have a good Merry Christmas. See you next week.
Yes, have a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you. Goodbye.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.